Hello and welcome to another Josh Plays 40k painting tutorial. Today I will be painting a clone trooper from the Star Wars Legion game box. Now we're going to be looking at a nice sort of simple and quick method to get these guys ready for the tabletop. I will also sort of elaborate on a few extra ways that you can make the models look sort of more in depth on the table, sort of verbally rather than sort of showing, as this tutorial is primarily just to get them ready and onto the tabletop ready for gaming. So without further ado, let's grab some brushes and get started. So the first thing I've done here is prime the model in White Scar spray paint, and this gives a nice sort of bright undertone ready to get the rest of the colours on, and really this is the majority of the work done. Painting white via brush can be quite long-winded, especially when you have to get the multiple coats down, and this new White Scar spray can is a nice bright white and matches in quite nicely with the White Scar from the pot. So it's a good base layer to work from, especially when working with white armour. The first things we're going to do is get the Black Legion contrast paint, and this is to start blocking in and getting those sort of black details on. That can't be done with a shade. Now you will have also noticed that I have left the arms off the miniature, and this is just to help get to some of the detailing. Now when their arms are on, getting to the sort of inner panels here on the arms can be a bit tricky, so it's just a little bit easier to keep them off, and obviously the same on the figure itself. What we're going to do with the Black Legion is sort of get all the sort of cloth areas in between all the armour panellings, so a bit like if we were painting a Space Marine, for instance. So it's these sort of areas here around the panelling itself. Now it might be a bit tricky to see on the camera just simply because obviously it's all white, but there are sort of indented areas where this cloth line sits. So there's obviously this side on both sides of the miniature, and then there is also these gaps under the miniature here where the cloth line lies between the panels of the legs. Now don't worry if you do get any of the Black Legion onto the armour. We can obviously neaten up with White Scar afterwards. Now once you've done these bottom bits, you will also want to look at the helmet as well, and this is primarily really just sort of two areas. The black trim around the top of the helmet. Now you will need to take your time with a nice thin brush to get your way round there, but also dropping the contrast paint into the visor of the helmet as well, so the sort of T-shaped visor going down the middle there. And then that's how you would work it on the main miniature. Obviously they're not forgetting as well the arms of the model as well, so particularly the cloth areas in here. Again, they can be a little bit hard to spot when you're looking at it, but you've got just a small sort of section on this arm here, for instance, just here, that would be blocked in with the black, just obviously on the shoulder, and then the same on the inside going round the top there as well. And that is the same for the other arm as well. So you've got the indented part here, and then the same on the back as well. And then once you've let those bits dry and you've got a good sort of grasping point on the arm holding the gun, you'll also want to do the tips of the gloves where the fingers lie, so on the sides here as well, and then the entire weapon itself. So obviously then we can highlight that up later on. So obviously take your time, work your way around this part. As I say, this blocking in these colours and obviously having the model already primed in white is basically 50% of the model already finished. So take your time to work your way around, and obviously not forgetting to neaten up with the White Scar before moving on to the next stage. Once you're happy with that Black Legion and you've tidied up all the rest of the white, we can move on to shading the armour. Now for this we're going to be using a 4-part mix of contrast medium to black, 1 part Black Legion, and then also just to take the sting out of the black and add a little bit of grey to the mix, we're going to add in sort of 1 to 2 brush fills of Apothecary White. Now you don't have to do the Apothecary White if you don't want to. You can just stick with the thinned black mix, but if you've got that to hand, it does help just take the sting out of the black a little bit. And then you can also just add just a touch of water as well, just to help with the flow. But again, you don't have to, depending on what sort of finish you're looking for. If you're looking for sort of grimy finish to the miniatures in terms of weathering, then necessarily this won't be so much of a problem. But what we're going to do is just sort of work panel by panel, and so have a small brush, and obviously try not to overload, but basically coat over the entire area with this shade, and then before it dries we're going to sort of take it off of the flat areas so that we can still retain some of that nice bright white. So let's get it coated. There we are. And then before it dries, just wash off your brush a little bit, and then just have a tiny bit of moisture into the brush. So not completely saturated, but a little bit, just to help draw that off. So what we're then going to do is just sort of pull back over the flat areas with this brush and just sort of remove the shade that we've added. So keeping it in the recesses, but just cleaning up the flatter areas just ever so slightly, just so that we can keep some of that white scar underneath, which will then make the highlighting process a lot smoother, and you'll also get a nice sort of cleaner finish with the shade. It won't look quite so blotchy. Now this does take a little bit of practice when doing this, but if you work your way sort of round each panel at a time, you don't want it to start drying. That's why we have to do it panel by panel, as contrast paints do have a habit of drying quite quickly. But again, depending on what sort of level of weathering that you're going for with the miniatures, you don't necessarily have to clear it completely, but if you're looking for quite a clean finish, then naturally you do this, and then you would relayer in the white scar, which will come back to some highlighting in a little while. So work your way around sort of panel by panel, and then once you're happy with that, we can move on to some highlights. Once you've applied that shade all over, and you're happy with that and that's all dried, you can then reassemble the miniature, as you can see that I've done here, putting the arms back on. And then we're going to move on to doing a bit of highlighting. Now there'll be 2 stages to this. First of all, highlighting up the whites of the armour. For this we're going to go back to white scar, and we're just going to pick out any of the areas on the miniature that are more prominent to the light, anything sort of more flat that you don't necessarily want to be so dark from the shade that we've done. So the shoulder pads, for instance, you can sort of leave a little bit of the shade in the sort of upper recesses where it sort of curves over, but necessarily we wouldn't want it to be so dark, so we can sort of coat a little bit over those just to bring the light back onto that armour. And then also sort of using it to catch any of the sharp edges. So for instance, around the backpack here, we can just sort of pinpoint those out just to make those stand out a little bit more, and again break up the shading that we've put on the armour. So work your way around the model until you're happy with what you've done, and then we can move on to the next highlight. Once you're happy with that white armour, we can move on to highlighting up the black now, and for this we're going to use Mechanicus Standard Grey, and this is primarily just for the weapon of the miniature, as the rest of the black is quite small, so highlighting it really doesn't have any sort of sharp edges, whereas the blasters they do. So sort of picking out any sort of areas that you want to just sort of stand out a little bit more, so any of the sort of ridges or raised areas, just to help sort of break up that Black Legion and make the guns look just a little bit more interesting. You can also pick out the fingers on the gloves, for instance, as well as working around. So you can add pretty much as much or as little of this as you want to, really. It just depends what sort of finish you're looking for, and obviously how sort of grimy you're looking to make them. Obviously, if you're looking for quite a dirty finish, then necessarily you wouldn't really want worrying too much about the highlighting, unless you're going for a more sort of dusty weathered look, and then you could go perhaps for a bit of a dry brush on there as well. But sort of work your way around the gun, obviously add as much or as little as you wish, and then we can move on. And here we have a finished Clone Trooper. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have any questions at all, please just leave them below, and I'll be happy to come back to you, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you.